Rasha, this one's for you. Uh, by the way, it was very nice getting to know you from such a long ways away in the Arab world and having you visit us and work with us a little bit this summer. And in part of the past year, we look forward to seeing you again sometime. Wish you well. Um, so Rasha's question was, how can she best make use of the museum? And she's going to be in a couple different places where she's going to have access to museums, good museums, and extremely good museums, actually. I wouldn't probably trade much my experience with the Metropolitan Museum and the Boston Museum of Fine Arts in terms of if you're limited to two museums. And I was fortunate enough to live within walking distance of each of those when I worked at the Art Students League and when I worked at the Fenway Studios with Gammell. So let me just go ahead and talk quickly about this. She wants to know, and I didn't put her question up there, but she wants to know how to best make use of her time in the museum. And I'm just going to give you some of the things that I found useful. And believe me, I don't believe this is definitive. And you'll probably notice that I don't recommend certain things. And I say they're absent by non-recommendation, but they're absent some of them that normally you see people doing. And but mostly anything you can do in the museum if you're really trying to get to know, in your studies. And by the way, this is all aimed at young students and anybody of any age who can enjoy it. But it really is crucial for young people to become in-depth experts of both the work, and I mean the work in person, of very good artists and the best artists, and also of nature itself, which is why I recommend our way of working. But you want to be master of all aspects of nature and skillful at the ability to render that. But you also want to be fully knowledgeable about the long history of art. And I am talking not about art in the sense it's used modernly, but in the sense of what great painting has historically been summed up as, So my first recommendation to you, and you'll see this list intermittently, and you take it for what it's worth and copy it if you like, but whatever. But the first thing I've always recommended students do, and I found this relatively early on, I don't recall if it was initiated by Gammell or somebody else, but first thing I recommend is stand in mid gallery, whatever area of the museum you walk into. And frankly, I don't care where you begin in a museum. The one thing you'll find is you're going to be exhausted very shortly. I couldn't last an hour and a half in any museum. The eye and the thinking and all that sort of stuff, I just found it overwhelming, and I would just gradually reduce it down to where I would be exhausted in an hour. So really, apply some of these things with that in mind. But in any case, every time you come into a gallery, what you don't want to do is walk around the pictures with your face stuck in them all the way, just bang, bang, bang with your face stuck in every picture. First of all, you exhaust yourself. It's about an hour in the first gallery. And the first gallery, no matter what gallery you're looking at, the first gallery does not have 40 great paintings. It might have 2, and that's typical of most galleries. And not saying anything about the individuals, but their best work maybe in a different gallery or whatever. But so what you want to do is stand in the mid-gallery, stand right in the middle, and just turn, looking, and wait for yourself to be attracted. Don't walk over to the picture until you've been attracted really strongly. And then I recommend that you rather note which are the top 3 attention getters for you in the middle of the gallery when you're looking. And at the very minimum, look at those first. My real recommendation, and by the way, none of this is over time, you'll have your own experiences and you'll want to do things your own way. But my recommendation is certainly the first time through, do that and just look at those things, those pictures, and to get your review of the entire museum if you need to. Just do that and then go to the next gallery. But do it because you want to also be understanding of how important it is to look good from a distance. I mean, good paintings look good from a distance as well as close up, okay? So, and that's a kind of a crucial thing to know. So what my next line is, look for the best and then look for better. And over time, you're going to learn to do that. But that idea of noticing the top 3, that's the rating idea. Rate the top 3, say which 3, from the distance. After you've come up close, you might change your mind about aspects of those pictures. Some pictures are dramatically wonderful from a distance and fall apart more so, at least, than others up close. But there are a number of people like Alma-Tadema that look really good up close and are not even interesting hardly from a distance. And I wouldn't say that across the board, but he's largely less interesting, say, than a sergeant, for example, from across the distance. So, and with this in mind, by the way, as you're leaving the gallery, as you're leaving the building, the museum, collect picture cards of those ones you can that are the very best of what you've seen. And begin a collection that you're going to then you're going to then begin to compare. You're going to make a collection, maybe it'll be 50 cards. And what I want you to do is start adding to those cards. And by adding the 50 first, you have to remove the last one, whatever number it is, by the way. You might start with your preference of 20. If you find that with your 20, you're not even sure that 3 of them are worth being in a group of 20 best pictures, bring better pictures in and replace them. Replace the previous ones, the least of those, with the next best one that you find. And you'll find an unusual value because it's making you think through quality, right? You're thinking through. And by the way, don't assume this because you should know something. You're reacting as a layperson. And that's the first proper reaction of every human being is when you walk into a museum, use your own eyes. Don't read what people have told you in books. Don't do any suggesting. Don't believe a picture is good because it's by Titian. Titian did a bunch of pictures that I wouldn't recommend you to study from at all. Doesn't mean there are parts of his stuff that you couldn't study from, but taken as a whole, there's a number of pictures in the history of painting that are really worthy of your time. And as Gammell would say, don't borrow from millionaires. Millionaires aren't just the best painters, but they're the best paintings of the best painters. So life is short, and just don't assume that all art, shall we say, is equal. Now, once you begin to you can do things with a pencil and that sort of thing in there. Copying is, routinely, recommended, but I never found I could get much benefit out of copying when my skills were so low. And so copying in certain ways, though, even when your skills are low, is beneficial. By the way, there's another problem with copying in museums, and that is the lighting can frequently be so bad. It'll be one thing on the painting and a different thing on your easel, wherever you have to put that. If you do copy, make sure you copy whatever lighting they're using, having your easel and painting in the same light as the painting itself, if you possibly can. That can be really difficult if you're trying to copy big pictures, and but you need the same lighting on it. You'll be shocked at what a disappointment your results will be when you take them out of the room if you don't do that. Anyway, black and white studies I'm recommending. This is charcoal if you like, probably not pencil. These are block-in, more or less, ideas, but black and white studies of value play. You draw the rectangle of the picture and play around with this, the spotting, the placement of the lights, the placement of the midtones, the general distribution of these kinds of things in relation to each other. Very easy thing to do. And the reason I recommend it in the museum, you think I can do that at home from my computer or something, or book. You really can't. You can't. I mean, the difference, especially and again, if the lighting in the museum isn't really insane, some of it is. But and a lot of the lighting in museums isn't what pictures were painted in, which is also going to be a problem over really understanding these pictures. But you'll find that electronic images are overly contrasty and all sorts of things like that, and they do mess with the actual spotting and distribution of values, as well as sharpness of edges, et cetera, et cetera. So little teeny details become as emphatic or as strong, at least in terms of their edge sharpness and that sort of thing, as more important areas. And that sort of thing is why you would want to be in a museum. Same thing is true of color. You should do distance color studies of the schemes of paintings. You'll see that Sargent and Degas, a lot of people have done that. It's a very good use of the museum without spending hours and hours and hours there, and you can do several in a day. But again, borrow from millionaires. Don't copy color schemes because so-and-so did it unless you really think it's amazing, okay? And copy with the idea of understanding the scheme, understanding the color relations, seeing a color relations dance or something, and see if you can make that work on your little study. And I think you could do that with a very small set of pastels. I don't know if they accept that in all museums. If you can't, try to do it with oils, but these are also short. They don't have to take a really long time, but you really want to get it right if you're going to do it. If you know what you're going to do, there's no reason you can't walk into the museum with a trace, the image traced onto a piece of paper and just block those areas in, or just copied from a book if you want to. There's nothing wrong with that. You're just color blocking. I don't prefer to do that. When you're color blocking, it isn't it isn't as important to every spot. I mean, it is important that spots be relatively the right sizes, but it isn't the most important thing. And mostly you're going to get that pretty good. Uh, so, uh, so from, let's see what else you can do. Oh yeah, so studying composition as a whole, that was the idea of the spotting aspect of it. And I hope I put that down here somewhere. Oh yeah, I did it. Did I put it in the wrong order? Where is it? Ah, well, if I left it out, there you are. But it would belong in the same list as that which says composition as a whole. Study composition as a whole, do little thumbnails. You've seen me on these programs show you what a thumbnail looks like. Really, really superficial expression of the value scheme as a scheme idea. And so, you know, the main line, counter line, look at those things I've shown you in the previous videos. Yeah, okay. Interesting that it does look like I left out. Oh no, black and white studies of value play. Okay, I didn't leave it out. I'm losing it, guys. All right, so that's the distance color studies. So the difference between color studies up close and color studies is the distance. The distant color studies is about color relations, so that's why you're doing it that way. You're standing back so you can really see the thing as a whole. And you want to see the real thing, so hopefully they'll have decent lighting on them. Okay. Now, when you get in closer, you can just take notes of the brush types, the type of brushes people use. If you can guess, if you have a chance to copy any area of a painting, say by a Velasquez or something, try to find the brush that the guy used. Try to even use the canvas type. We mean the relative graininess of it, and then take notes of how the strokes are woven into each other. Notice that sort of thing, right? Are they all side by side in a row? How are strokes woven? And what do edges look like? You know, when you're copying, that's a really fantastic thing to have. In fact, that was one of the great benefits I got from copying, was actually copying the edges of, say, Chardin. You sit there and or even a Bouguereau to see how different that idea is from the Chardin idea. But just to be able to do it with a brush and find out how thick the paint has to be, for example, and just to do on what kind of brush it has to be and what kind of grain the canvas has to be to produce that edge look. Okay, that's where a dark meets a light and makes a silhouette. Okay, okay, that's what we mean by edge. So, and also notice where the thickness of paint differs as you go from area to area. Those are things you can just observe. You can take notes about these things. Look at good paintings. Only look at good paintings. And the work of good painters, and work that impresses you in these particular areas. If you don't like the surface of a work, well, you remember you're going to be eclectic here. You want to pick the goodies from everywhere. You know, you really don't want to just say, I'm a little optician. You know, I think, what was that, somebody asking about that recently? You really don't want to be a wannabe tician, a wannabe sergeant, a wannabe anything. You really want to just learn to see. And in this case here, we're talking about the craft and how would you make this kind of an edge? It's very elegant looking or beautiful looking or craft-like, you know, high craftsmanship. What is that? What does that look like? The surface itself, how ridgy is it, and where are the ridges? And do painters use ridges well, or should ridges be avoided? I mean, you can make notes of things like that. Some of this won't apply. You won't understand any of this stuff until you're actually painting pictures, but this will give you stuff to think about that I hadn't got a clue about for the first 3 or so years of painting and going to museums. So I was just looking at that picture with my eyes wide open and not a brain in my head, which is probably where most of you are. So then you can do longer copies to see the finish quality. So that's where you could do a section of a work, or even a small picture by somebody who you really think has a quality that suggests how, you know, strong unity in terms of craftsman-like finish. And just copy something like that just with that in mind. Just, by the way, when you go to copy for one thing. I mean, you go pick up other stuff. Make sure you go with a single appointment, right? With a single purpose. By the way, one thing I didn't mention, you know, the idea of pictures, figure grouping and things like that, that is one thing you can study from books. You can look at books, and I would recommend you copy sections, little groups of figures, like like the Captive Andromache by Leighton. Copy that just copy the sections, the figure groupings and those things. But the information applies right across the board to all kinds of painting when it comes to organizing figures. And when people are having difficulty with still life, the best organization of elements like three objects is in the figure painting of the great masters. Now, with the exception of Chardin, who's a terrific organizer of stuff. A little uneven, but mostly a very good lesson. But take notes also on the level of detail in general as you look at pictures. Just note that as you travel through your museums. By the way, I don't recommend you do any of these things every single time. I recommend you go to the museum with one of these things in mind and leave. Okay, you won't remember you'll remember two things probably. That was about the limit of my memory. So I found if I went to the museum with one thing in mind, I would remember it from a lot of different painters, which gives you a sort of more of an encyclopedic data collection. So now I'll make a last point, and I hate to end on a negative note, but when we'd go to the museum with Gammell, I have to say sometimes it was a very annoying thing because, and I mentioned it to you before, because he would just go into how bad the wall colors are. Back in those days, all the walls were white, and so the pictures look really dingy. And now they're painting them bright reds, which in some cases, or things like bright reds. In some cases, actually, that would have been the way some of those pictures would have hung on the wall. But rich colors are also going to eat the lunch of the rich colors in a painting. So, we're looking for walls to be neutral value, neutral color. Just saying, so when you go through museums, notice how pictures look and against what walls they look best. Just notice that sort of thing. But you don't have to lose your mind over it. You will find it's frustrating. And the same thing is true of lighting, museum lighting. It looks like both in color and in lighting, museum directors are trying to be artists, and they're trying to do some artistic thing, artsy thing. And it's most annoying when you go to study a painting and you can't see it because the light is so goofy. And among other things, by the way, you're trying to study a composition and there's a lighting lit and slit from the top in such a way that there's a big, huge, maybe a 6-inch sometimes cast shadow under the frame, from the top down, shrinking the size of the painting. The other thing they do is put spotlights on pictures. Sometimes they'll put a spotlight right in the brightest part of the picture and think that's clever. Well, you can't learn from that when they do that. The picture isn't that bright. The parts in the center aren't as bright by comparison with the outside edges as this effect is making them. So they're sort of trying, what is that? What would you call that? Liberty, trying to enhance the light of a picture. Who are these people? You know what I mean? Do any of these museum curators rate or gallery managers rate in any way in terms of understanding or skill with the masters? And why should they do that? And I think it's an affront to painting, but I've said it out loud in museums. I almost always speak out loud in museums when I see what they do to pictures. It's a complete offense, and for the purposes of displaying a thing, it's just wrong. You're supposed to show pictures so that can be seen. One of the things that's happening lately, like these museums are all taking on this idea of putting up UV glazes on the windows, through screens or something. And they're killing the ability to see the picture at all. They're so dark. You can go to maybe most museums now, and you can just tell that a picture's there. You really can't look at it. You can't enjoy it because the light is so bad you can't see it. And I was noticing that. I think it was The Rape of Europa and The Gardener was the first time I saw it, but it's very typical in museums now. So there again, if you're going to copy, you're probably going to be wasting your time in a museum that's so badly lit. And of course, it's just so much more of an idea when you're copying to try to copy in a room that's lit with a light that the painter would have worked in. I remember seeing this wonderful top gallery show of Monet, and I think it might have been the Clark, not the Clark, yeah, it was the Clark Museum, not the Clark, I'm sorry, the Worcester Museum. And but it might have been in Boston, but this top floor had a top light, and it was showing a Monet show. And you have never seen Monet if you haven't seen him in that light. That's Monet's light. And if you really want to be a teaching museum, that's a fundamental element. All that light should be the light they painted into the best of your abilities. I was so annoyed when they created that north-facing side of the Museum of Fine Arts, and then put all the American Impressionists in artificial light, and the outside area with daylight. It's a walkway. I thought that was one of the more clever things I've ever seen in museum design. Anyway, you got to keep your sense of humor But as I said, we'd go with Gammell to these things, and he would be so incensed that I'm not sure we get two words in about the composition of a particular picture or something. I mean, I'll have to ask. I should have asked that of Tom if he ever had a different experience. I mean, and he was very. I mean, he was outspoken as well, right there on the spot, and he would call the directors over and he would castigate them right there on the spot and say, are you guys unteachable?" He would have written them letters and that sort of thing. I'm not saying you should offend people. You don't have to do it offensively, but you really should. When you see something like that happening, you really have a reason to. You have knowledge. As a young student, you don't. But later on, when you know, you have an obligation to speak as an expert, and you should speak up. And the last thing about these museums, you're going to find there's a ton of overcleaning. We watched while they overcleaned I think it was Horatio Bonar, what I forget who it was, a general by Stewart, and we watched as a painting by Bouguereau in Denver was overcleaned down to the lines around toes. And if anybody knows Bouguereau, you know that that's where he began, but it's certainly not what you'll ever see in a painting. And this was I was raised on that painting. I watched it for years, and it was one of those 3 or 4 or 5 paintings that the Denver Museum had that was worth anything, apart from some of the Western art, by the way, which is a delight in its own different way. But so the overcleaning factor is a big deal, primarily for one reason, though. It's not just you can pick on it, but there's 2 things. One is you can learn not to use varnishes in your medium, because when people are trying to remove the surface varnish, these overcleaners, I should say these cleaners, they've historically done it with a varnish remover that will also remove the varnishes in the pigments. And you're going to be seeing, when you look at these, if you want to copy them, you'll be wasting your time if you think you're copying anything in terms of the final look of one of those paintings, unless some area has successfully been left alone. It sounds like I didn't say that well, but so again, I don't want you to leave me on that note either, as much as I would have liked Gammell to think about this in a different way. So if you wouldn't mind, just don't make me do it again, but go back and maybe wipe off that last line and just go look at the main points. What would you want to do in galleries, and think it through. If you found other things that are of good effect, feel free to share them to me and the rest. Share them with me and the rest of the viewers. All right, I think I'm out of time, and thank you, Rasha. I do hope you do well there. It's been very nice knowing you. So I do expect to see you again one day, and hope you do well, and hope your family does well. Okay, all right. So we'll see you all next time. Don't forget to share, comment, subscribe. Don't do more than comment, actually. Throw some more questions at us. Throw some more conversation at us. Extend our conversation, whatever you want to do. And then, of course, donate if you can. It's been much appreciated. That was a wonderful, quick donation to get us up to being able to do the interview of Dunley, the Gammell background interview. And I think we'll be seeing that really soon. I think I'm taping a little conversation tomorrow, and I think that'll be the end of the taping. So the rest, I think, is pretty well in hand. All right. Good. See you next time.